Welcome to the sixth edition of the And Away They Joe show. Hello, hello, Melanie. Hello.
Hi, how are you?
I'm glad that Japan's back. They're gonna have the Cafe Pharaoh's gonna race this
Oh,
Wednesday in the
nice.
morning. American Pharaoh, baby. He's
Wow, that's
undefeated.
exciting.
Maybe he gets to the Derby and then will be, I don't know, first Japanese horse to win, I guess. But I don't know if I want to wake up that early in the morning to see him. But we'll see. It was an exciting week of racing, though, huh?
Wow, especially Belmont. Amazing races yesterday.
And of course, we tried to do a pick four ticket and then left out Tacticus, and look what happens.
Well, I mean, we t- we talked about it. He was always the bridesmaid, never the bride, but uh, you know, what do you do?
We let him beat us, and he beat us,
He
and he beat
did.
us pretty good.
He did, but he was working really good. His workouts was really good, and the distance wouldn't be a problem going a mile and a quarter, 10 furlongs. But yeah, it was one of those things when you looked on paper, it just seemed like he was just not a horse that wanted to win. But surprise, he's a grade
Yeah,
two.
and it's one
He's a
of
grade
those.
two
Well,
winner. So
it's one of those feel good things too, because apparently he's had a lot of bad luck and bad trips and all these other things. They tried him with blinkers and without, and they put the blinkers
mhm.
back on him, and then now he ran a really good race, and
Yeah,
you kind of feel like it's
his time.
you. Yeah, it was his time.
it was
He
it
had
was
to have
his time.
finally won a race.
Yeah, and he's a gray. I've always, back in the Derby, I watched his races, and he had won the Wood, and then he had won the Tampa Derby, I guess. And uh, but it was his time, so happy for the connections.
But I thought Moretti still ran a good race too because he was up there, he faded back, and then he started
Hmm.
charging again. So that was kind of interesting to see Moretti do that.
Yeah, that was our pick.
Yeah, got greedy. It's the way it works sometimes.
Yeah, but well, what about social paranoia? Perfect name for what's going on in the world in race 8 in the poker stakes.
Yeah, and at 4-1, that was definitely a good price. So it was like not we didn't get the favorite. Well, we knew that favorite wasn't going to win, and I
Mm-hmm.
forget the name. It was the number 9 horse from England.
Mm.
But we left him off the ticket because we had a feeling. But everybody thought he was going to. But I think social paranoia like went over the top. It was absolutely crazy how he came from the back and did
Oh
that.
my God. Yeah, he closed from out of the clouds after he was tipped up wide at the top of the stretch, and they were going so slow. And I guess he was further back than desired in the early runnings, but third off the layoff and the cutback in distance.
Yeah, and also Vekoma running that big race in the Met. That was pretty good. Why are
Yes.
you laughing?
No, I'm so sorry, but I love Vekoma, and at the top of the stretch, heading for home, it seemed like Vekoma was going to get swallowed up by the field, but at the final furlong, he found that other gear. But it's just his form is less than perfect, and I keep on watching the reruns, and you just see his front leg just swings out, and it's like a swimming motion, and so just I'm sorry I laughed. It was just
Oh, is it because of how he runs?
yeah, just how he runs. It's just on Twitter you know they make funny videos and stuff, but um his tenacious attitude makes up for his form in running, and he's a gritty competitor, so how can you deny that? So sorry. Just the way he runs is
Is
kind
it
of
because
funny.
he runs? Is
Is
it
it?
because of how he runs?
Yeah. His
Okay,
front.
I just wanted to double check because it
Yeah.
sounded like you were laughing because of the way he runs.
No, well, because his front leg, I mean, you've seen it, right? How he runs, it swings out, and it's kind of like a swimming motion. And so they make some jokes on Twitter and stuff, and it is funny, but you can't deny his tenacious, gritty attitude. You can't, but
No, I mean, ran them off their feet. Two
yeah,
turns was good for him. He looked
exactly.
really
Yeah.
good.
Yeah, very good. And I mean, like I mentioned, that I really thought the field was going to swallow him up, but it was, he ran really good. So,
Later on in the program, we're going to have Matt Dinnerman again talking about pedigrees and what to look for in the paddock. And have you ever tried to pick a horse by just based off of looks before, Melanie?
yeah, there's a lot of different things that you can look at, as far as how, in the post, parade, how, if they're on their toes, if they're dragging their feet, there's different things, their muscular form that you can look at. Yeah, I have.
Have you ever looked at the horses without looking at the odds?
I have not. I kind of combine it, but I've never done it. Have you?
Yeah, one time I had to because the ADW that I use didn't have the horses' names or the odds. They had the numbers, and then it was Hong Kong, so Hong Kong doesn't even show the odds. So you pretty much had to guess just by watching the people doing it in the paddock or watching the telecast in Hong Kong. You had to look at them. That was all you could do it off of. I mean, my ADW's Watch It Wager, which I should probably change to a different one because their technology isn't that great. But I had to look at all the horses. I had to guess. Like, it was hard for me to guess who the winner was. I had to do it based off of looks. So it was kind of interesting of like, well, this one looks okay. This one, I don't know why he's looking that way, but that's all right. He might win a race or something like that. Or, and then the one I ended up picking was, of course, the favorite. I was like, wow, this one looks like he's ready to go. He wants to win.
And
And it was the favorite.
yeah, and always a lot of times the favorite, or the winner in the race obviously looks their best on how they're prancing, how alert they are, and how they look. So
Yeah. So that's what Matt's going to explain to us in the next segment here. But I just wanted to briefly mention that next week we're going to have a show sometime during the week, probably around Friday. I've been a little off as far as like what the schedule has been going because of the July 4th weekend and all that. And Melanie, did you have a good July 4th?
yeah, I did. It was very low key and didn't do much.
You watched the races though.
Oh yeah, I did. I did watch the race. And one race that we didn't talk about. What did you think about Instill Regard?
Oh, I thought that was a perfect ride by Erod. That was absolutely like poetry in motion, how he handled them.
Exactly how he just found that seam and just accelerated. Amazing.
Well, I mean, I kind of wanted to see Sadler's Joy for one because he's the old timer in the group, and two, he was the better odds.
Right.
And he was there. He was getting there. I thought he was gonna have enough, but no. In Still Regard, just waited, and then had the perfect run.
I know that was a surprise, but that was a good race as well.
What about Uncle Chuck in the Los Al Derby with 4 horses in the race?
I know he was obviously the best. So looking forward to see what happens next. Where he runs next.
What if the Kentucky Derby only had 4 horses? Can you believe that?
Yeah.
The Los Al Derby, 4 horses. And what if like the Kentucky Derby had 4 horses? They won't even need that auxiliary gate. Oh right. No, they could just put them in the auxiliary gate.
Yeah, I know.
They don't need the other gate.
Yeah. Yeah. 4 horses, that's but Uncle Chuck ran a good race, and what do you say with 4 horses? So
no, I mean, he had a lot of talent. I mean, his last race before that, he looked really good. Like, he just blew him away, and he did the same thing in the Los Al. There was never any doubt. He was 1-5. He just blew him, and that stretch at Los Al is so long, but
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, there was no way he was going to catch him after that. Now we're going to have Matt Dinnerman talking about paddock picks and pedigrees. But before, I just wanted to say you could follow Melanie on Twitter at Skim the Rail. You could also follow my Twitter at @and_away You could also follow and subscribe to the Anchor channel, which is anchor.fm/and_away for more podcasts like this one. Now we're going to have Matt explain to us everything he knows about all that. And Melanie, have a good day. We'll see you next week.
You as well.
Joining me on the podcast today, we have Matt Dinnerman, and we have a lot of good races this weekend, and he's going to join us for explaining a lot of things about paddock handicapping and pedigrees. Matt, how are you doing today?
I'm good, Joe. How are you?
It's nice and sunny over there. Is it over here? Is it nice and sunny over in Albany?
Yes, it's a really nice day, at least today. And with the Bay Area summer weather coming in, that's really good because in the summertime, a lot of blue skies, a lot of sun, and a lot of outdoor activities. So not partaking in those today, watching some racing. But yeah, nice weather today and nice weather in the Bay Area for the rest of the summer, surely.
So you don't make a trip to Golden Gate just to walk on the turf or take a jog on the turf?
Well, sometimes I jog on the turf course, yeah, but not today. Not today. I am fully invested in talking to you about pedigrees and all that stuff. I'm having my cheat day, so to speak, taking a day off to watch horses and eat.
Yeah. I have a protein bar. I'm about to take a walk soon after we're done recording here. So, Matt, I know that you've done a lot of the paddock analysis, and you do it all the way from the booth, and you've done it at the paddock itself. Can you tell us a little bit about what you should look for as far as horses in the paddock?
Well, it would take a while to explain everything, what to look for, and it depends on what exactly you're looking for. I think one general thing that you can look for, and like I said, it's very general, is the coat. And looking at a horse's coat can really give you a good indicator as to how a horse is doing from a health perspective. If they've got a nice shiny coat, if their coat isn't too raggedy, good job to the groom for having them very. B, it can also be an indication of a very healthy horse, and a horse that might have a little bit of a dull coat, not as much color, a little raggedy at times. That's an indication that maybe this horse won't put up an A effort, and it's like a human. I mean, a person that is sick with whatever isn't going to look as good as a healthy person. So it's the same thing with animals. Remember, these are horses and they're living beings, and they're not machines. So there are indicators based on their appearance as to how they may be doing from a health perspective. And the coat is the main thing I look for. And then when you talk about, when I said earlier, specifics, let's just say you're looking at a horse coming off a layoff. There's a good indicator of you're looking for certain things. And the one thing I look for is how lean or how heavy they may be coming off a layoff, because it is like a person. If you're a person that goes to the gym and works out every day or very much close to every day, you're going to stay lean, hopefully, and you're going to not be too heavy, I would have to imagine, if you're exercising. But once you stop exercising, after a while, you may put on a few pounds if you continue to have the same eating regimen, because you're probably going to be putting more calories into your body than you are losing them, especially when it comes to taking away working out. With a horse, it's very much the same way. And there are some times where I'll look at a horse and I'll say to myself, they're a little bit heavy off this layoff. If they're a little bit on the heavier side, sometimes that means they might need a race. If they're lean, usually off a layoff, you have to take a case-by-case basis and say to yourself, well, if this horse is always just sort of a lean horse, then that's a normality. But if they're lean off a layoff, I like to see that, because that could mean that horses are fit enough to run good off a break. Like I said, it is very much a case-by-case basis. But those are two things that, for example, I wanted to talk about here when you asked me to come on. One is the coat, which I think is something that's very general and anybody can look at and have a good idea as to whether that coat is good looking or not. But B, talking about depending on certain scenarios and situations, you want to look for different things. That's a perfect example. Looking at horses off a layoff and determining if they look fit and ready to go off of layoffs.
Yeah, it's like when I look in the paddock sometimes, and I know it's a little different than when you're in person than when you're looking at it on TV, is looking at their muscular build. Does the muscular build of the horse determine anything for you too?
Absolutely. You can look at a lot of different things there and try to determine what you think a horse can do on the racetrack. And I know, for example, I know Maggie Wolfendale, who does a really good job at NYRA, and she can tell you all sorts of different information. And I'll just get very general talking about the muscular build of a horse. But, for example, many people do look at first-time starters, horses that are just coming out. You're trying to get a good sense as to, okay, what exactly does this horse look like from a muscular build perspective? Are they going to be able to sprint route, that sort of thing? Turf, dirt, that sort of angle. A horse that is very much on the bulky side, strong, muscular strapping, usually that means that they're going to be pretty decent sprinting. A horse that's very bulky has a large hindquarters. That'll tell you that they've probably got some explosive turn of foot to them, or at the very least, they've got enough speed to where they might be able to kick on in a sprint race. Horses that are pure routers sometimes can be a lot more on the lean side. So when I look at horses, for example, first-time starters in a sprint, that's one of the first things I look at. I look at the hindquarters and their overall build. Are they big, strapping, muscular types compared to the other first-time starters in the race? And it's able to give me a good idea as to, I wonder if this horse here, maybe on the lean side, maybe looking sort of like he wants a little more ground as opposed to a horse that's real big and bulky. And I can say to myself, well, this horse certainly looks like one that can go one turn.
And then from the paddock, we go to the post parade. And is there anything that you look at when they're parading out or warming up on the track there, Matt?
Well, the post parade, yeah, you can definitely look for a couple things there. I mean, the first thing that definitely comes to mind, I think, with anybody, whether it be a novice horse player or an experienced horse player, is definitely sweat and being able to indicate, okay, you've looked at the coat, you looked at the muscle conformation. Now let's take a look and see how they're doing on the track. If there's sweat on the shoulders, in the hindquarters there, between the hindquarters, usually that's not necessarily a good indication that a horse is ready to run a good race. In fact, that usually can be a knock on a horse from a physical perspective. Looking at that, being able to understand how these things work, I think is important to knowing how a horse could perform and looking to see how their mental state is. Because if a horse is sweating, maybe they're a little bit nervous about something for whatever reason that may be. But here's the thing about horses that are sweating. You sort of have to take it as a case-by-case basis, like I said, because I'll give you an example. There was a horse named Shackelford, who I'm sure you remember, Joe, and a lot of people know. He's a stallion now. He was a very, very good horse for Dale Romans back east. But this horse would sweat before every single race, regardless of the weather, regardless of what type of race. Obviously, the horses don't know what type of race they're running in. But nonetheless, this horse would sweat before every single race. And it was just a normal thing for him, a normal occurrence. And with that in mind, if you know that, you can look and say, I don't really need to worry about that because this horse is always sweating. And you do see horses that are like that. Not very often, but there are horses at times that do get a little bit hot before the races. And then there's other reasons to believe a horse may sweat, and maybe it's not necessarily a knock on them. For example, there's that, and there's also the weather. If you're running at a track and it's very, very hot and or humid outside and horses are sweating, well, you have to take that with a grain of salt, because then you can say to yourself, well, it is a hot day out. Here at Golden Gate, for example, I can definitely knock a horse that is sweating in the post parade because it usually doesn't get very hot out here. It can at times, but not very often, especially in the winter months and even early in the spring and later on in the fall. So if I see a horse sweating, I say to myself, well, it's definitely not because of the weather. And another thing I look for horses in the post parade are simply how they're acting. Are they on their toes? Are they a little bit dull? Are they just a little bit quiet? Is unnecessarily quiet? Are they a horse that maybe they're not happy with the pony? They're rearing up, or they're getting really excited, or using up a lot of mental energy. That's not necessarily a good thing. So I look for a horse that is either relaxed, doesn't want to be too relaxed, but a horse that isn't using much energy. But one thing I really like to see is a bowed neck and a horse on their toes. I love that. Whenever I see a horse on their toes, and especially when their neck's bowed too, that's telling me the horse is happy and they're ready to run a good race. If they're walking around and their ears are up, that's also a positive sign. The ears up means they're inquisitive. They're sort of just taking everything in, looking around, but they're nice and relaxed out there and they're happy. So those are other things I look for in the post parades.
Another interesting thing about the weather was I remember going to Sacramento. Have you been to Sacramento and watched the races over there at the fairs?
I haven't been there, but I know how hot it can get and how humid it can get at Sacramento.
Oh yeah, because the one time I went there probably about a couple of years ago, it was hot, so they were pushing the horses out there to get out there fast, so short post parades, and I remember they would hose them down before they even got to the track. So it was like a little interesting that you mentioned the sweating. So if you see something like that, it's like, well, they're all wet, so I don't know which one to pick.
Right.
Yeah, but
yeah, and you just sort of have to pay attention to that. I mean, and it does get hot in Sacramento, so at times I'm sure they could dry out anyway by the time they get to the gate at the very least.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And another thing I wanted to mention before we get to the gallop out is when there's something I also look for is when the jockey gets a leg up on the or on the horse, and you see him and he looks ready to go. Sometimes they look like they don't want to go and they just look like, oh my god, just get off me already. I don't know if you've ever noticed that, but that's another thing that I've noticed, where if you see a jockey go on a horse and then they're like, okay, let's go, let's get this race over with, or no, I don't want to race today.
You could see a little bit of that for sure. And again, it's very much a case by case basis because, for example, me here at Golden Gate, I know all the horses and sort of their quirks, because once you get to see them over and over, you get a good idea of what their quirks are and whether maybe acting up in the paddock once is either just sort of a fluke and for whatever reason they're not happy about something, or if it's a normal occurrence. And sometimes there are horses that are just like that in the paddock, and they just get a little bit antsy before every single race. So those are things you want to know and try to key in on if you follow a single circuit. But if a horse is acting up in the paddock and that's part of it, not really wanting that jockey to get up on the horse, that can be definitely seen as a negative, Joe.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I don't know if I've ever tried to pick when that was happening. So after that, we have the gallop out and seeing if they hit the line hard, and then after the race and see how they do, what they look like after. Is there anything you look for as far as the gallop out?
Well, when I watch gallop outs, I personally look more for the energy level of the horse than I do the actual gallop out. And I don't want to say gallop outs are overrated, but I will say that there are times where you can really get caught in a trap there, because there are certain horses that gallop out great. Let's just say they're going 6.5 furlongs and they gallop out great. And you say to yourself, oh my goodness, I can't wait till this horse goes 2 turns. Then he goes 2 turns and you find out he's a stretch out sprinter. And he doesn't really want 2 turns. He just wants to run on in sprint races. So you've got that angle to where sometimes you could get caught in a trap with that. I'm looking to see on the gallop out, though, mostly, how is a horse galloping out? What's their energy level like? I mean, if you see a horse that's all out to win going 6 furlongs, they hit the wire and they're just totally out of gas on the gallop out, that's telling me if they go 6.5 next time, they better have a little more stamina. And again, it could all depend on the race scenario as well that had just occurred. If a horse is dueling on the lead, going very fast fractions, yes, they do have a right to be tired, especially on the gallop out. But I'm looking to see if a horse galloping out, do they have good energy? Are their ears up? Do they look like they want to do more? And if that's the case, that's a positive thing. And it also tells me, let's just say a horse is coming off a layoff and they gallop out okay. That's going to tell me, I think, second start off the break, they're probably going to do even better because it seems like they really got some fitness and something into them into that race. So I'm looking more for the energy level, and that I guess you could call a minority viewpoint because I don't think a lot of people necessarily look at the energy level first over the actual gallop out. But I guess you could say it's part of the gallop out, but that's what I look for.
And I know with after the gallop out, you want to see before then, even during the race, if they got into any troubles. I know that you've said before that the gallop out also has to do with a little bit of the trip handicapping, so to speak. So it's like trying to remember, and if you see that horse before and you remember the names, and I know that with Golden Gate, you pretty much remember all the horses. So you'll remember the last time he was in trouble or was in traffic or got checked or whatever the case may be. And that could help out your handicapping as far as playing the any of the races there.
Trip handicapping, I've always said, is extremely essential. If you want to be a horse player and win money, you absolutely have to do trip handicapping, meaning watching races, figuring out trips of horses, and it can get very complex. It's not just about, well, did this horse miss the break and lose all chance? It's not just about, did this horse have traffic issues? It never got to fully striding out and was never given a chance to be competitive or win the race. There's a lot more to it. There's track biases. Was there a horse that broke from the rail and the rail was dead and nobody was making up ground at the rail that day? He stayed on the rail throughout and just never picked up his feet. There's all sorts of things that go into trip handicapping, but gallop outs are part of the trip handicapping. I think that with trip handicapping, there's another thing where there are times where you could get caught in a trap because next time out, you see a horse that everybody knows had a bad trip. They might be an underlay in their next start. It doesn't mean that they're not going to win. It doesn't mean that they're not going to run well. But sometimes, especially on bigger circuits where there are a lot of eyes on the bigger circuits, there are a lot of sharp handicappers out there. They see the trip play angle. They bet the horse. You look on the board, he's 6-5, and you say to yourself, well, do I really want to be playing this horse at 6-5, depending on these circumstances? It's interesting, but I think, especially at Golden Gate, I've found that I'm not going to say there aren't a lot of people watching because there are, but there aren't as many eyes on Golden Gate as, let's just say, Belmont Park. And sometimes you can get a little bit of a price on the trip plays. And I've hit plenty of races from the on-track air feed saying, hey, this horse is a trip play, and he goes on and wins. So trip handicapping, very important, and it's something that I would encourage everybody to get involved in, especially if you want to, A, be a full-time horse player and or B, make some money. You're playing a good-sized ticket. You want to do homework. That's the type of homework you want to do.
And I know that you've mentioned to me before, as far as the trip handicapping, that sometimes it is good to look at the replays because the trouble indicator on the form doesn't really tell you much if they say they got bumped 3 wide, but then, ran a good race and all that kind of stuff. So that's pretty much essential when you're trying to watch replays and all that stuff to make sure that their comment wasn't really, their comment was valid. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. And I'll give you an example. Last week, I was playing a pick 4 at Belmont. And it was not Belmont, Churchill Downs. It was an all-stakes pick 4 there, and that's why I played it, because it was an all-stakes pick 4. And there was a comment line, and it said a horse steadied at the 8th pole. So I went back and watched the replay, and I said to myself after watching the replay, he did steady at the 8th pole. He had to take up, but just ever so slightly, and he wasn't going to win anyway. In fact, he wasn't even going to hit the board at that point. So with that in mind, if I had just looked at the comment line and it says steadied at the 8th pole, lost by 4, and I said, I wonder if this horse, if he didn't steady, if he was running on, he had to steady and he lost his momentum, maybe I can pick this horse. Well, if I didn't watch the replay, I would have had a false idea of exactly how he steadied, what exactly happened there. And I didn't use him on the ticket because I said to myself, this horse wasn't going to win at this level last time anyway, even though he did steady. Went off in an underlay because the comment line, I believe, really got to some people, and he didn't fire again. So with trip handicapping, it's also about trying to verify whether the comment lines match your idea of what actually happened out there.
Yeah, because sometimes I read it and I'm like, huh?
Right.
I watch the replay. I'm like, what? That didn't. Well, whatever.
Right, exactly. And you got to make those decisions. But, you know, there's a difference between steadying at the 8th pole when you're backing out and you don't have much of a shot, and steadying at the 8th pole when you're running on and you've got nowhere to go.
Yeah, absolutely. It's totally, I think, very vital that you watch a replay on especially like what you were saying, if you want to be a full-time handicap, because a lot of those guys, they look at all that stuff. You got to take a lot of these things into consideration. So I think that that's very, very key, is taking the time to do all that, not just looking at the form, but watching the replays also and seeing how they look in the paddock and all that stuff. Speaking of looking at the form, so with all that in consideration, we also talk about the first-time starters, and I know, Matt, that there's a lot of things to look at as far as first-time starters go, but I know that one of the big things is pedigrees. But explain to me what you think, what you should look for as far as when you're looking at the form. And I know it looks a little intimidating because there's only workouts and other things that, you know, you don't know how they did before. They're starting for their first time. So what do you look for as far as looking at the form and trying to pick a winner from the first-time starters?
There are obviously a few indicators trying to come up with a conclusion, or I should say coming up to a prediction of who you think will win with maiden races, first-time starters, even horses that have run before, but they're inexperienced and maybe they're trying something new. The three things when it comes to first-time starters that I think I would really key in on, one, of course, are the workouts. You can get caught in a trap with workouts because, for example, I'd rather see a horse that's working a half mile and 50 flat that wants to do a lot more, is basically on a hold and wants to do more, than a horse that works fast times all the time but is all out to do so. And obviously, if you're just looking on paper, you don't really know at all how a horse is actually working. Now, you could say to yourself, if a horse is working bullet workouts or fast times for the mornings continuously, you could make a pretty good guess that, well, this horse probably at the very least has some tactical speed in him or her. It doesn't mean he's going to show it first out. You never know. The horse could miss the break. The horse could break with the field and get intimidated and not want to go on. You just never really know with first-time starters. But there are certain indicators there based on the times that maybe you can get a little bit of a feel of what type of speed a horse has. And that also comes back to pedigrees as well. Maybe there's a horse that has long-distance pedigree. They don't have very fast workouts, and you can make an assumption, well, maybe this horse wants a little more distance, and in a sprint race, first time out, this horse probably won't show a lot of early speed. So there are the workouts. There are, of course, the trainer patterns, figuring out, okay, is this trainer who trains this horse the type of person that is going to have his or her horses really cranked up first out, or is this a trainer that's going to give their horse a race or two before they're in really tip-top shape? You also can look at the jockey and try to figure out, is this a jockey that this trainer rides frequently? And if it is, that probably means that this horse might be a little live here. Their top jockey obviously thinks that this horse can run well. Or is there a jockey for a trainer that the jockey never rides for that trainer, and you say, well, his top 3 or 4 go-to guys are all on other horses. Maybe this horse isn't that good. And these things, of course, are all speculation and guessing. The third thing, of course, the big one, I think, is pedigrees. And we'll start with the top side, the stallion. There are a lot of very versatile stallions out there. There are certain stallions like Kitten's Joy, who are very much turf producers. Stallion like Kitten's Joy really only produces turf horses. I can't even think of a good Kitten's Joy that ran on the dirt. Now, there are certain Kitten's Joys that can win on the dirt. They're usually not quality Kitten's Joys. But if I'm looking at a main special weight race and I see a Kitten's Joy on the dirt, first of all, it's very unlikely that will be the case because a lot of trainers know the Kitten's Joys are turf horses. But even if that's the case, I usually say to myself, I want to wait till this horse gets on the turf. But nonetheless, there's that sort of instance. But there are also stallions that are very much precocious stallions. Sky Mesa is a very underrated precocious stallion. More Than Ready's another more well-known precocious stallion. More Than Ready's and Sky Mesa's. I think those two stallions are the two stallions that I really enjoy looking for prices, or at least looking at their horses at the very least, even if they're not a price, very early in their careers. It's not to say they can't produce a good older horse, because they can, absolutely, but there are certain stallions like Sky Mesa and More Than Ready that have pretty good numbers with precocious horses, and I look for that. When it comes to first-time starters and looking at the bottom side of the pedigree, the top side of the pedigree is the stallion, the father's side. The bottom side is the mother's side, or the dam side. And I think the dam side tells a lot more of a story that's going to give you a little bit of a better indicator as to how a horse is going to perform, because not only do you have the dam's history, the mother's history there, maybe you have a dam that was a sprinter, but you can also look at the produce she's produced. And sometimes you get horses that have 7 or 8 siblings at least, and maybe all of them were precocious sprinters. And that is going to give you an indication that, well, this horse probably is going to be okay. The pedigree's there for this horse to be a sprinter. Then there are other dams that are sometimes routers, and they produce route horses, and you say to yourself, well, the chances are this horse here might be a little bit better going longer. But then you also see cases where you see a dam who was a sprinter and she produced a number of routers. So it's sort of a case-by-case basis. But I think it's very important and it's good to look at the bottom side of the pedigree, because it does give you a story of what type of producer the dam is and what type of racehorse she was herself.
Yeah, and that's a big thing, because for me, I get kind of lazy, and following a lot of international racing, I always see something like, if I see an international horse from like England or Europe or Australia, and I already see, those horses already race on the turf, so this horse has to be good on the turf. It ends up not being good on the turf.
Right. And that's what's amazing about handicapping, is it's just like every single horse is its own puzzle, trying to figure out the puzzle pieces in the race. And sometimes the pedigree suggests one thing and it ends up being a totally different story. And for example, Curlin, he's a horse, a stallion that, you look at him, he produces horses typically that like a little more distance, and not to say he can't be precocious, but his horses get better over time and they want a little more distance. There are times where Curlins win first out sprinting and they are very precocious. So these things are all sort of interesting puzzles that you're trying to put together. And there are definitely situations where, someone defies the odds, so to speak, and outruns their pedigree, so to speak.
And when you look at pedigrees, I don't know if you've studied them a lot or anything like that, but I know that if you're buying a horse, you get to see like how the horse did, the mom side and the dad side, and you look at all their accomplishments and all the backstory behind that. Do you look at that as well?
Well, I don't look at the page like in the catalog for horses that are at sales, for example. I don't really look too much into the second dam, the third dam. I can do that. I can go online and find it if I want to. But I do look at the dam and her produce. That's really the key thing I look at, especially when I'm talking about horses on air at Golden Gate. And I go to the dam full search on Equibase. It's sort of a hidden tool that a lot of people don't know about that's on Equibase. But if you go on Google and type in dam full search, you'll click on a link after you Google it, and you'll see that you can type in the name of a dam and you press the search bar, and it'll give all of her babies. And of course, it's going to take some time. You got to click on all of them and see what they're good at and what they're not good at. And that's sort of what I really key in on when I'm handicapping maiden races. But if I want to, I can definitely go on and look farther back down the line.
Yeah, because that's that was like another thing like I was looking at, because there were times where I was like purchasing or wanting to get into partnership with horses, and then I look at that too, and I was like, oh, does this really apply to the handicapping? Like, maybe it's just more if you want to buy the horse. So that's why I was like,
oh, yeah, but you can definitely, I mean, absolutely use that tool as handicapping, Joe. And I'll give you a perfect example of a horse that I liked. He didn't win, but he ran very well. There was a horse in the Alcatraz Stakes here on closing weekend at Golden Gate named A Journey to Freedom, who is a sibling to Another Twist of Fate. Well, I looked at his pedigree way back when he was a younger horse, when he was a 2-year-old. His second dam, I don't remember exactly if it was his second dam for sure, if it was a sibling to the second dam. Her name was Nebraska Tornado, and she was a very good turf horse, and she also won the French Oaks. And he was trying turf for the first time in the Alcatraz. So with that in mind, the fact that Nebraska Tornado wasn't the pedigree there way back when, I said, I'm going to pick this horse in the top 3. Well, he went off the longest shot in the field and only lost the race by a neck. And the thing is, I didn't pick him as the top pick. The winner I picked as the top pick, but I made him the second pick. And that would have been a pretty nice exacta if I had bet the race and boxed it, Joe. And just the only reason I did that was because, simply enough, there was that turf pedigree that I was looking at last year when he was a 2-year-old.
Yeah, and it's a lot of studying too, at least for me, that's somebody that doesn't know too much about pedigree, because I started watching around 2012. So from 2012 and seeing all the horses now, like, so I don't know, Tonalist or something like that, or you can name other ones, the Union Rags or some, horses around back then. And for me, it was like, okay, I remember this horse. I don't remember how he did, but maybe it was something worth betting. So, this what you're telling me now is probably why I'm not getting my full pick 5s out of 5 or full pick 4s out of 4. I'm missing that one thing because I'm always 3 out of 4, 4 out of 5. So that's probably the one thing that I need to focus on more, is trying to look at the form and trying to get more information than just seeing how they did in the past. So I really appreciate your time for helping me and helping others out here listening for all that kind of information too, Matt.
Thanks for having me on, Joe. It was a lot of fun chatting with you about all this stuff. And remember, if you cannot hit your pick 4s continuously, even after our conversation, I will give you one more piece of advice. And that, my friend, is to play a pick 3 instead. That's all. That's it. That's all I can tell you. Right. Just play a double. You'll hit it.
Well, we look forward to hearing you back on the air, Matt, and that's going to be around July 29th for the Golden Gate. Well, the Sonoma County Fair at Golden Gate, right?
That's right, yes. So Golden Gate Fields will be back in very late July. Now, the 2-week meet that we start off with is actually Santa Rosa's dates, which is the Sonoma County Fair at Golden Gate Fields meet. And then in mid-August, we will be back running our summer meet at Golden Gate Fields, which is a Golden Gate Fields meet, allocated dates for Golden Gate Fields, and we'll be running there through October 6th, I believe. So a lot of good action coming from where the Bay comes to play very soon, and we will be so ready for it when it comes around.
Yeah, and with everything that's going on in the world right now, I just want to say this little thing is that we're looking forward to hearing that, because we don't know what's going to come up anytime soon as far as shutdowns and all that. So it would actually be nice to see Golden Gate back on the air and watching you and watching all the horses over there, Matt.
Absolutely, and it's definitely a nice way for people to stay upbeat when you've got horse racing to watch, something that we all love and enjoy participating in, whether it be horsemen, whether it be owners, or whether it be horse players, the very loyal customer, of course. And it's good to have horse racing on the schedule when there are a lot of other things that aren't around right now, especially a lot of other sports. That's something that we can all be really proud of, is that horse racing continues.
Yeah, and I wouldn't be surprised if by that time the horses are wearing masks. So we'll see. All right, Matt, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it, and I'm pretty sure that this information is going to help me get more money now.